Now that you've started a podcast, you're looking to promote your podcast to get it into the ears of more people. I got some tips for you coming up next. Hey, what's going on? It's the Shan Man, radio broadcaster, podcaster, and podcast producer. Today's video is powered by Agora Pulse, and today we're talking all about how to promote your podcast out into the masses. How do you get more people to listen to your podcast? Because more than likely, you've launched a podcast and you haven't gotten no more than a few listens. Maybe you've gotten a couple hundred listens, but you're looking to scale that. You're looking to grow it. And don't think that scaling or growing it is going to take forever. Sometimes you can scale and grow your podcast a lot faster than normal, or it's going to be a gradual growth over time. So my only word to you and word of advice to you is to just stay patient, and any growth is good growth. It's just like if you were to go to the gym and eat a decent diet. Any movement and any consumption of good food is going to put you in the right direction. So it goes the same for podcasting. Any growth with your podcast is a good thing. Now, the first way you can promote your podcast is something that you've probably been looking up on YouTube. You've been coming across a lot of these marketer YouTube videos, and they're talking about how you can promote your podcast using paid ads. And there's usually a budget that goes behind paid ads. But I want to make sure that you understand that with those other videos, that what they're talking about, there's a strategy that goes on behind their paid ads. Paid ads to drive traffic to a podcast can be good, or it can be bad. It's like almost like dumping money into a fire if you don't have a strategy in place. So what I recommend that you do is that you put a strategy in place to get your listener, your potential new listener, to listen to your podcast, or to get them on an email list in some way. There's plenty of videos on YouTube where you can look at this, but there are strategies that go on behind this. And there is a video where I talk about the importance of email marketing for podcasting. That video is up here. It's a few months old, but it still applies to this day. So make sure you go ahead and click up there, and you can watch that video in another tab or after this video. So using paid ads is one good way that you can get ears onto your podcast. Using Facebook ads, you could use Google keyword ads, but again, use a strategy. The second step is going to be using your social media channels. I mean, this is something that is pretty obvious, right? And that's how most people like to promote their podcast. So when you're using your social media channels, you have this opportunity to share out clips of your podcast, but not everyone is going to be listening to those clips of your podcast. I've mentioned that you could utilize a tool like an audiogram to promote your podcast out on Instagram, or maybe even on Twitter, or even Facebook. All right, but it takes time. It takes time to put that out onto your social media channels. And how do you find the time in order to do that? And there's plenty of tools out there that you can utilize. And one of the tools that I have actually been using and starting to use is Agora Pulse. This is an automation piece of software or an application that you can find where I can basically create a schedule of content that is delivered out into my social media channels, whether it be Twitter, whether it be Facebook, LinkedIn, all the social media channels. And it allows me to create this schedule where I'm not constantly pushing, I guess you could say, I'm not constantly pushing all the time to that particular channel about the same stuff. I'm able to vary out my content onto those channels. One of the really cool tools about Agora Pulse is that if you have a blog or you have created show notes for your podcast, Agora Pulse gives you this opportunity to highlight quotes within the text of your blog and then share it out onto a social media channel and create a schedule around certain quotes within your show notes of your podcast. And this is why I think it's very important that podcasters transcribe their podcast, the entire transcription of the podcast, because it gives you more content to help promote your podcast out onto these other channels. So I recommend that you check out that video on transcription that is up here. It's going to be really helpful for you, or I'll leave it down in the description below, and you can go ahead and click on that video down there. The third way that you can promote your podcast is by simply showing up on other people's podcasts. So how do you do that? How do you get on other people's podcasts? Really, this is all based around research. The first steps that you really need to come up with is really think about what is it that you are really good at talking about? What is it that you're talking about in terms of your podcast. Maybe your podcast is all about 80s hair metal music, and you want to showcase that knowledge on other podcasts and maybe go on to an alternative music podcast and talk about how 80s music was decimated by the grunge movement. You could talk about that. Or maybe you come up with a series of things that you can talk about. Maybe you love hair metal, and maybe you also love fitness, and you can show up on another podcast. So what do? How do you get on these podcasts? Well, I will tell you this right now. Most podcasters are looking for guests if you are within the wheelhouse of their topic. If you have a podcast, it really helps out because it's a great cross promotion. You can get on your podcast and say, I was on a particular podcast that talks about fitness. You may want to check that out over there. All right. So getting on other people's podcasts definitely gives you more exposure. And I will tell you, it does give you more exposure because anytime that I have been exposed to someone else's audience, I've always gotten this carryover into what I am doing. Whether it's someone that wants to listen to me on the radio, whether it's someone who wants to learn about podcasting, whether it's someone who wants to watch my own or listen to my own podcast, be the experience, they always bleed over into my own universe. And I collect them through either getting a subscription on iTunes, on YouTube, or getting them to subscribe to my email newsletter list. All right. So this is all about you getting on podcasts. And I wouldn't say stretch what you know, but look out for these podcasts. Go into iTunes, reach out to the guests, network with other people to get others, their listeners, to come to your podcast. And you will want to do the same. That's why it's important to have guests on your podcast, because typically your guests bring their audiences with them. That's usually pretty helpful, okay? And the final thing I want to talk to you about when it comes to promotion, if you're going to be on other people's podcasts, is the repetition. This all goes back to the social media marketing element that I was talking about. Repetition is a huge thing when it comes down to promoting your podcast. In radio, we typically run promotions about a month or 2 months in advance when it comes down to a concert or any type of event that we've got going on. You'll likely hear this in your city on your local radio station, where the radio station is promoting an event way ahead of time. And have you ever said to yourself, God, I'm so sick of hearing about this promotion? Well, they do that intentionally because they want to drive it into your head. The event is coming and they are looking to drive sales. So in your case, as a podcaster, you're looking to drive to get listens. So what you'll want to do is schedule out pieces of content that repeat themselves over a couple of days or a couple of weeks. You'll have to figure out that schedule on your own, but if you have enough content, you can schedule them out inside of something like Agora Pulse, and that will give you the freedom to continue to make more content for your podcast. If you have any questions on anything about this video, go ahead and leave a comment down below. And of course, leave this a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel right down below if you're watching this on YouTube, and make sure you hit that little bell button. It will help you out and notify you whenever I release brand new content onto my YouTube channel. Again, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And of course, over here on your right hand side, there's going to be a useful video that you can utilize. In fact, maybe I'll put the video up there about transcriptions so you can check that out and learn more about why you should be transcribing your podcast. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.